Hello, this is Alex Restrepo with Veritas. I want to thank everybody for joining us on this webinar for how to optimize workloads in hybrid clouds. This session is going to be focusing in on reporting and gaining visibility to those clouds. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to our experts here, Charles Hickman and Ernie Bergan, as they take us through the challenges and, of course, how we can help resolve some of them. Thanks. Take it away, guys.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. In the next little while, we're going to give you a bit of an overview in terms of what Veritas can be doing in your VMware environments in terms of analytics and how that can be helping you not just improving your VMware environments, but also your VMware environments in a cloud environment. We will give you a short demo in terms of how the product works, but let's get going. So to help you to sort of think through the context of just the IT world as we move forward, I'm going to ask you 4 different questions. We appreciate you just doing a little poll in here. So as you get that, you're welcome to sort of give the answers back. So from the machine learning point of view, what we've all heard about is artificial intelligence, machine learning. And for some of it, it's a case of, is it real? Is it hype? What's actually happening? So the question that we've got for you is, in 2018 or since 2018, what has been the increase in machine learning patterns? So it's the 3rd fastest growing category. It gets us to start to believe that, it may be becoming real. Patterns is a very, very good indication of exactly where technology is actually going to go. So as we're looking at the poll now, we've got something like 10% are saying that it's been less than 50%. We've got about 20% saying 75, 25% also saying it's about 100%, and the majority of folks are saying it's more than 100%. For everybody who's voted, the actual increase since 2018 is 116%. Machine learning is definitely real, and we're going to have to now start thinking as a IT community as to what does that really mean to us? What's it going to mean moving forward? Second question is going to be around edge computing. So we'll just launch the second poll coming here. Okay, and so this is now what is actually coming out of the edge. So thoughts around for 2019, even though the year's not fully finished, what percentage do we think is going to be coming from edge nodes? Now, this is traditional data center-like information, but not being generated in the data center. It's coming from the edge. Give everyone a few minutes to get their answers in. Okay, the majority is saying that it's probably close to 20%, 20 or 50%. We've also got a few votes for and around 13, that are 10%, and then the smallest number being around. Okay, so I'm just going to close that poll. And the answer that we find is 10%. I think that's actually a little low. I think as we move forward, for those that were saying, that it's probably 20% or 50%, which is what the majority of folks did, I'd be sort of on your side to say I think that there is a bigger percentage. I think as machine learning gets stronger, as AI gets stronger, definitely the importance of edge computing to the data center is going to get bigger and bigger. But the predictions for this year is that the edge will end up being about 10% of the enterprise data moved forward. Let's move on to our next question. So this is now hybrid cloud, and we're looking here for the ideas around the adoption. So by 2020, how many organizations will have deployed a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud? So gone away from just planning, but actually into the deployment mode. And we'll just launch the poll on that. So the 3 answers that we're giving you a choice of is 25%, 50%, or 75%. And as the answers are coming in, we're getting an overwhelming amount saying it's probably around the 50% mark, with an even split between those saying it's maybe 25, maybe 75%. So let's just close that poll. 75% will have deployed hybrid cloud and multi-cloud by 2020. So within 12 months, this is probably the single fastest adoption of a technology in IT ever. There's a good chance that 75% will actually be higher, but it says everything that we do, everything that you're doing in your infrastructure is going to be around how do you deal with hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and all the issues that go along with it. How do you know what stays on-prem? How do you know what's actually going to move? The last question that we have here for you is data-driven. So the question that's really coming out here is we're going to have an explosion, a bigger explosion of data generation globally. So just the demand for data, it's going to outgrow the supply. We physically cannot make enough SSDs or whatever the storage medium is to store all of the data that's going to be generated. And if you think about it, part of that is also going to be from the point of view, if it's being generated at the edge, if it's sensor data, then do you keep it, do you not? So poll that is opened here, it's a question of how much will we outstrip supply? So basically, how much more demand will there be than what we can physically keep? We'll give everyone a few minutes on this. So right now, the majority of voting is saying that we will have 50% of our data unable to be stored as you're voting. The next highest option is as high as 80%. Okay, so let me just close that poll. And this one's actually a shocking result. So 80% of the data that will be generated will not be able to be stored. There's just physically not the manufacturing capability in the industry to be able to be making enough storage media to save what's getting generated. Now, maybe if that's sensor data, we don't need it anyway. There's going to be an amount of data that's machine generated that we don't really need to store. This becomes very frightening when you think about now that you've got edge data that's going to be hitting you, when you're now looking at it saying you're moving to hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, and there will not physically be enough storage for 80% of the data that's generated. That's putting a lot of new demands on the environment, on your IT infrastructures. If we look at what IDC is predicting, they're suggesting that there's going to be 163 zettabytes of data by 2025. I actually saw a recent forecast that said that that could even be as high as 175. So think about this. We'll just do a visual. If this was an iPhone, and if we're just looking at kind of like, a standard iPhone, how many would it take to generate 163 zettabytes of data? And the answer is 320 trillion. And at 1/3 of an inch thick, if we lined them up side by side, we would have the ability of these iPhones to circulate or to circumnavigate the globe 107 times. That's frightening. And bear in mind that last poll that we just did, even if we had that amount, 80% of the data that's generated, 80% of that 160 physically won't be able to be stored. We've got to find out another way on how to do things. So hopefully that was a little bit of fun, got you thinking a little bit, but now it comes down to how do you run your IT environment? And it doesn't change. If you're a storage admin, if you're a virtualization admin, if you're an application admin, if you're running the entire data center, there are certain goals that really haven't changed for decades and decades. I think there's a bigger focus. It's now been the alignment of business, information with IT. So at one point, IT, I think we were lucky that we could have been a little bit sheltered, a little bit isolated from the business. That now that just does not happen. There is a bigger need now that you're going to be moving more data into the cloud to globally visualize where is your data. I think the days of being able to track things in Excel or other means, they're really getting beyond this. When we start thinking about zettabytes of data being delivered, how do you actually know where the data is? Within that is the whole concept of storage optimization. Clearly, we're not going to have enough physical storage, so you're going to have to make sure that the right data is being put and stored at the right time. Data protection, compliance, all of that is now going to become critical to what you do moving forward. And the question around data protection is not just a case of saying, am I protected? It's a case of, am I protecting the right assets at the right time? What we have learned is over time, sometimes VMs get decommissioned, they get turned off, and yet a backup policy might be still running against them. Is that being overprotected? Because clearly that's a resource not being optimized. And as you move to the cloud, what's your costs? I mean, there is a huge value to move to the cloud, which will start moving physical IT assets to be less of your intellectual property and what you really want to be managing as an IT organization, and allowing you to kind of outsource the physical infrastructure and focus more on the people and the IT and the IP that will come from those people. And within all of that, it's now going to become more and more important to know, how do you just manage the cost in that? Some of the realities, we're going to have more meetings talking about all this, how to move forward. There's going to always be the idea of, like, do we just buy more hardware? How do you end up just getting the answers? And you'll no doubt always have a sales rep that just says, come on, buy more storage, because we can just give you more and it just works that way. You all know that's not the answer. Sort of having the mean shots here of sort of that sales rep just saying bigger is better is not going to work. There's got to be a smarter way to look around it. So we at Veritas, you may know us as the net backup company or the backup exec company. We've definitely increased from that point of view, and there's a lot more that we do. We've now moved to become a data services company and the data services platform company. It's important, we just want to share with you the sort of number of data sources that we collect from. It's 500 plus. We have 150 storage targets. There's over 30 different clouds that we manage, and every type of deployment model. The point that we're making here is over 25 years of having our technology, we're probably the number one technology that touches the most data for customers. And that's not going to change. As your data requirements increase, we're going to be there to try to help you support it. But we're not just sitting there saying you need a better backup product. The way that we are strategizing moving forward, we have this concept of availability, protection, and insights. And today I want to focus mainly on the insight side of it. So it's basically, how do you go beyond just doing the administration? How can you start looking at bringing automation into the insights you have for your VMware, your cloud, your IT infrastructure? Some of the things that we do around our insights portfolio is unparalleled data visibility across everything, not just your storage, not just your VMs, not just your cloud, not just your backup, but across everything. The key to what we do here is all about giving you data insights or actionable insights to what's actually happening into your IT infrastructure, particularly managing what's happening from a data point of view. So this year, Veritas purchased a local Silicon Valley company called Aptar. Aptar IT Analytics is the product that we want to demonstrate for you shortly. And what IT Analytics does is it takes any cloud, any storage, any backup, and it lets you see it in a single unified way. To give you an idea of the things that we do, first and foremost, we will collect data. We will do our collection from a number of different ways. We will use published APIs for the devices that are there. We will be able to use CLIs, if there's REST APIs. We will collect the data, whether it is on-prem or whether it's in the cloud, and we will give you a single visual of it. Once we've collected the data, we do more than just say, oh, okay, this is what the storage array is saying it's actually talking to, or this is what the host thinks it's got. We will correlate the data from an end-to-end perspective so that if the storage believes it has X allocated to it, we will confirm that also with the application. We will look into the operating system to make sure that the same data is being understood so we can correlate things. We will then present that data back in a single UI and in various dashboards so that you could either be doing it at an executive level dashboard, you could be doing it at a more granular level. And ultimately, it's all about providing you actionable insights. What do you need to do? If your IT environment is healthy, great, you don't need to be worrying about it. But if a backup job failed, or if you're about to run out of storage, or if a VM has been turned off, but it was a critical VM, how do you respond to that? And these are the sort of answers that we give. The collection that we do, to give you a bit of an idea, we have an agentless data collector. We have been doing this now for the past 15 years. So when you look at just the array of technology that we are reporting upon, that we're collecting from, it is very bright, very wide in terms of what it does. I'll point your eyes down to the 6 o'clock mark to what we show here as an SDK, our software developer kit. One of the reasons we can support as many different IT elements as we do is because of the software developer kit. So Rubrik, who you'll see here on the backup applications, you may think of Rubrik and hear Veritas talking of Rubrik and think, aren't you guys competitors? Yes, but from your point of view, for how you need to run your infrastructure, Rubrik is just a necessary technology that we need to be able to report on. And Rubrik has an interesting story. Last November, one of the large investment banks on the East Coast was looking to bring Rubrik into their IT infrastructure. But they had standardized on Aptar as being the reporting tool of choice across their entire investment bank. And they needed us to be able to have Rubrik reported. We worked with Rubrik. They came to us Thanksgiving of last year. In January, we were able to go back to this investment bank and be reporting upon Rubrik. The SDK, the software developer kit, allowed us to very quickly onboard new technology. I share that because this is not going to stop. More and more technology is going to come at us. We've already built into it how we're going to be able to manage that moving forward. Now, with all of the data that we collect, it all gets pushed up into a central portal. And if you think about it, that data we collect, it may well be a single data center. It may be multiple data centers that you have. It may be multiple customers that you're actually maybe running as a managed service provider. It may well be that you've got multiple departments and you want it all consolidated. And all of that view comes into a single centralized portal. The key to what we do is 15 years of development in what we call our adaptive intelligence engine. It's the artificial intelligence that we have within our product. We gather data from about 20,000 unique data points. Again, back to that previous visual, whether that's storage, whether that's servers, whether that's virtual environments, whether it's the cloud. And we apply an Aptar algorithm to analyze and correlate all of that data. The result that we come up with is artificial intelligence. It's machine-led answers with the element of human governance. So we're not just going to go off and do something. We're going to give you the ability to say, I want to take this action, or you don't. If we look at some of those initial business challenges, one of the earlier slides, by doing the correlation work that we do, by doing the analytics, by doing the data gathering we do, we can then address all of these different use cases. The biggest key to what we do, it's not just the collection and the output, is really the end-to-end correlation. A really good example of that I could share with you is we had an insurance company that was running our technology, and they had an application that was having some performance issues. They automatically believed it must be the storage, it must be the app, or it must be the network. And we were actually in there doing a proof of concept for them to see if the technology could work for them. And even though we were in a proof of concept stage, we collected across their environment, and we actually came back and said, do you realize you have a backup job running on that application with that storage at 3 p.m. in the afternoon? Clearly, IT didn't believe that. I mean, that's just not what you do. But it was true. Someone had accidentally flipped the bit on the backup job that accidentally moved AM to PM. A simple answer, but it's the end-to-end correlation that we do that was able to be really helpful to this customer and say, there's the problem. It wasn't what they thought it was, but the result was still the same. This is just one visual in terms of giving an idea of what we can do in your VMware environment with Veritas and with our new Aptar technology. So this is an example here where we look at a storage optimization dashboard. So what we're viewing here is what is the total amount of storage you may have? How much of that is actually non-reclaimable, meaning it's being properly used, versus what's reclaimable. So if we go to the next part of the dashboard and we look at the storage optimization analysis, when we look at what could actually be reclaimable, we actually start seeing things that there's VMs that are being powered off. There's some low CPU VM usage. Is that an advantage we can take? And ultimately, we get the recommendations around the storage optimization. But enough of slides. Let me hand this over to Ernie and let you just really see how the product works. So Ernie, with no further ado, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Charles. Let me just make my screen full now that I've started sharing it, just to take a little more screen real estate here. There we go. So as Charles mentioned, we do data collection, and what we're going to show now is that user interface that's enabled through a browser. And I'm actually working in Firefox at this moment, but we would support Chrome, Firefox, essentially anything that's HTML5 compliant. Each user's experience when they log into the portal can be configured by themselves or by their administrator within the Aptar environment. So when I logged in as the Aptar demonstration user, I actually have 5 dashboards that auto-loaded for me. And a dashboard in our language is just a named tab. And on that named tab, we have dragged and dropped any mix of reports we want. So these first 5 tabs were auto-loaded and for me by default. Just prior to starting the live link here, I went ahead and brought up another dashboard called the VM Visibility Dashboard. So the key to our dashboard views is that there's, from all of the information that we collect from, you can mix and match any combination of reports that you'd like. So there you could have a virtualization, a storage, a backup, a cloud, a facet of components within a single dashboard, or you may choose to be more centric around a business process. So really that's the way my default dashboards have been set up. But the key is they're really configurable by the user. Now, one of the things that Charles talked about is that amazingly high percentage of folks that are moving into at least a hybrid cloud. In fact, we talk to a lot of customers that are at least kicking the tires on a cloud first strategy. But in almost all cases, there's some presence of cloud. And one of the things that as we've evolved as a product is an ability to not only look at cloud from a standpoint of what you're deploying from an infrastructure standpoint, but also what are you spending on that. So for today, for both AWS and Azure, we'll actually pull in deep content around both of those capabilities and give you quick and easy insight into what you're doing, both in terms of deployment in that cloud as well as spend. Now, dashboards in our world are what I would call a product of a more experienced user who really has had a chance to look at the hundreds of templates that we offer, and they've come to a decision to say, these are great reports that I would like to see featured each time I log in. If you're a new user to the tool, fear not, we do offer a capability called the inventory. And the inventory by default will organize itself around objects. So we can see, for example, in this environment, all demo data, by the way, and you'll note some holes in that. But the point is, it's representative of what we would hope to see in a real world, which is potentially a very complex environment with multiple storage vendors, multiple storage frames. In this environment, 112 storage arrays represented across a pretty good cross-section of what we support, not all. And certainly then we see some cloud representation here. We see a representation of backup servers. And of course, in all of these cases, whether I'm looking at a top level or I drill down to a sub-level of information, the focus and out of the box, we will provide summary information for you at whatever level you choose. So we will, in inventory, we will offer an overview slide, a tab, and then you also have the option of adding other tabs to your experience. So I'm running on a wireless connection here, so let's just keep moving and I'll come back to that tab. And one of the features that we offer is that for all the infrastructure that we're collecting from, we have the ability through what we call an attribute. Some other vendors another comparable term might be tagging, so that for collected objects, we can assign attributes to those. And really an attribute is limited mostly by your imagination. We show a number of representative, commonly used attributes in this environment. And so to verbalize that, we've got 3,080 hosts that we've discovered from cloud, from backup products, from hypervisors, including certainly VMware. And we assemble these hosts wherever we know about them from all these discovery points. And then you have the option to associate attribute information with those. So a very common one, in fact, when I was a customer of Aptar, we were application centric in my space. So we deployed hosts on behalf usually of applications. And then that was the way the business really thought about most of the IT infrastructure. So as an example then, out of 3,000 hosts, we have in this environment an application attribute associated with 2,169 of those. We can see how those, for this particular application attribute, we can see the values for those shown over here in the table of contents. If I wanted to turn off a particular category or multiple categories, I can certainly do that. And you'll notice how we rescale on the fly. And then more significantly, if I hover over any of these wedges for additional information, not only do I see it in the hover help, but I would also see it over in our table of contents, our legend. So visually, how these attributes are used within the tool is you can imagine them as rapid grouping functions, an ability for you to say, for example, summarize based on this application team called sales. And we see by just clicking on that wedge, I see that there are 408 hosts that carry that attribute value. I can rapidly see how they're distributed by operating system, by the type of host that they represent. And even in detail down below, we can see the 408, first 10 of those displayed in our selection. So attributes are so compelling to the tool that we actually expose attributes in our report engines. And even here within the inventory engine itself, one can organize oneself around, instead of being object first, we can go attribute first. So for example, I can choose to organize myself around a locational attribute. And now if I were to refocus myself around, for example, the attribute with a location of New York, I now see that there are 17 arrays in there. There are 3 backup servers, etc. And if I touch into any of those, for example, one VM server, I will now be focused on, it happens to be this ESX01, and notice that by that attribute, we've now exposed content. And in all of our overview slides, you'll note hyperlinks in most throughout the tool. So for example, I'm looking at APT ESX01, and I can see how it's done as a blast collection from a standpoint of high-level CPU, memory, disk, data stores, and even being able to look at total known or total active VM guests. And if I want to go grab more information about those, I can simply drill to that content. And as you'd expect, anywhere you see the hyperlink, it's an invitation for more information. So if I look at the VM size, for example, and I drill into this particular guest, I'm, no surprise, going to be able to now show the contents, the VM disks, the NVRAMs, the swap files, the logs, etc. So we're getting all of this natively through, typically we're collecting from the vCenter, the vSphere environment, and we grab everything about the VMware space from that collection point. Back to inventory quickly. If I wanted to also, we offer location as an out-of-the-box suggestion for organization by an attribute, but we talked about, for example, the application attribute. I could just as easily say, organize my world first around that other attribute, and now let the system rapidly rearrange itself around that new attribute, in this case, application, and we can drill in and see content in terms of how things are distributed by that attribute. within these, any way that you view it, for these inventory objects as we display content, we also have the ability for a user to, for example, within VMware, if they're looking at this top level, this is what we would provide out of the box. Perhaps you would want to see what other templates, reports might be available for you to potentially add to your inventory experience when you're looking at VMs. So what we will do is we know the object type that's listed here, and what we can do then is, for example, offer up an opportunity to say, let's look at, oh golly, let's just look at VM performance. Even though I know we don't have great performance metrics in this demo environment, I can at least see some summaries for the ESX server level. So the point here is that inventory is a rapid landing page for you to provide fast access to information. As you become more comfortable with the tool, then that combination of not only being able to either, if I wanted to, by the way, persist this particular report in my inventory experience, I can simply pin it, and every time that I come into the tool from this point forward, I'll see both the overview as well as this VM performance summary. If I leave it unpinned, it's transient for this session, this working environment. So inventory is a very helpful tool. It's actually fast. You can rapidly configure it. And as we can see, we're bringing in information from all of those sources of information. And it really kind of, where it hits the road is that, for example, ability to aggregate hosts, whether they be physically discovered, reported by storage arrays, reported by the backup engine, reported by the hypervisors. We can bring all that data together in this single pane of glass. And then particularly for VMware, what we also do if we're grabbing from your storage arrays and we're grabbing from your fiber channel switches and we're grabbing, of course, from VMware, then we can provide end-to-end visibility that starts to transcend the kind of traditional boundary of what some VMware groups would control versus what they don't. So what I mean by that is I've got a couple of reports that sort of show that ability for us to say at a detailed level in this view, here's a guest, what it's known by both guest as well as the guest host name, what ESX server was last hosting it, what data store is provisioning it. Here are the files within that data store. And just as significantly, all the way we've mapped that out to beyond the boundaries of traditional VMware to be able to say, we know that that's SAN attached storage. It's coming from a NetApp 3 server. It's going to a particular provision by particular LUNs. And I don't have performance information for the LUNs in here, but if I did, and you would, I could even drill in and see metrics. In fact, that ability to kind of look across the boundaries of collected information, this VM guest to LUN performance report was actually a brainchild of one of our credit card customers who said, Jiminy, if we get a report of normally a poorly performing VM guest, we'd like an ability to get some sense of what's going on across the spectrum of the data store as well as the LUN. So when what we were able to do, really there again, all credit to them for the idea, is we were able to put that data together to say, here, for example, is how the last collection statuses for the guests have been looking. Here's how the data store's been looking. And over here on this nice wide report, if I had LUN performance coming in, I would actually see LUN performance metrics. So that credit card customer that I was describing, they actually use this report as a triage tool to gauge whether, for example, if they've got a hot LUN, or if maybe they've got a data store that's just not performing well, or potentially because they're also able to look at neighboring guests that are all sharing the same data store and LUN combination, they may very quickly be able to say, we need to look on the guest itself. The neighboring, the data store looks healthy, the LUN looks healthy, nominally performing well, neighboring guests look good. Let's spend our energy not looking at the bigger picture, but let's look at what's going on the guest. Or, of course, it could be an indication of a storage or an ESX sort of centric problem. So that's some of that correlation that we can provide, end-to-end visibility. The other area that is really common is that we'll come up with things like risk mitigation analyses. We actually have rules around both storage optimization and risk mitigation that are really the product of that intelligence and time within the product that Charles talked about. So over time, for example, in storage optimization, we realize that there are reclamation opportunities or storage optimization opportunities that might transcend multiple touches of what I call the storage optimization elephant. I mean, if you think of different people touching different parts of the elephant but not having a vision beyond the immediate touch, describing a total optimization opportunity gets interesting. So we provide in multiple facets here, we can provide opportunities to provide multiple touches and then put those into a single pane of glass. So using, for example, storage, each of these is an independent report, but what we can do is we can let you set your thresholds for what you define, for example, as an inactive LUN. Is it 30 days? Is it 45 days? Is it 15 days? That being how many days from initial discovery of the LUN through our discovery, polling of the array, do you want to allow to lapse before you would declare the LUN being an inactive object? You set the thresholds, you set the rules, and then each of these, of course, rows represents one of those rules that's then applied, and we see that in, let me go to the right tab here, in data protection. We summarize that in a single, storage optimization, Ernie. We go to a single tab and we can then see the summary of that information. So now we're seeing that potential opportunity for reclamation or optimization, high backup retentions, VMs with undiscovered disks, low CPU, VMs powered off. If you're in the cloud, we will give you insight into orphan volumes, orphan snapshots, etc. All of these things cost money, whether it's just because it's idle capacity not available otherwise, or certainly in the case of your cloud provisioning, you're going to pay something for those features and spaces. And then as we've seen, all of these are drillable. So if someone says, for example, really, I've got that many terabytes of what we're declaring as unused LUNs, tell me more. We can drill into that content. We start to see then by storage array, here's the summary of information. And if I then want to get into a storage centric language, I can start to say, tell me information about those particular LUNs, and up comes the list. So this becomes actionable for a storage engineer to be able to go in and find out what's up with those LUNs. Maybe those are actually reprovisionable, reclaimable. We do have customers that have used just this storage optimization capability to defer spend on any new storage for as much as 2 years. We had a major bank in South America that needed to go through a significant cost control measure, and they were able to defer storage spend for 2 years just by reclaiming a bunch of opportunities that they had. We have a similar capability around risk mitigation. So in the same space that we had storage optimization rules, we can do the same thing with risk mitigation, and including in particular to the VMware would be looking at guest disk forecasting and data store forecasting to try to give you some predictive analytics of when you may be reaching problematic thresholds for either the guest disk itself or the data store itself. And of course, then we can do the same thing around storage and data protection in a very familiar sense. Now that you've seen it for storage optimization, you can also see the same thing for risk mitigation. So a very similar donut chart. We can expand that out within this environment. We have no VM issues at risk, but we do have some storage consecutive failures and overall status issues. And so again, the drill down capability to say, tell me more about these hosts with consecutive failures. If you're a typical backup operations, you probably have thousands and thousands of jobs running a day, potentially for thousands and thousands of clients. And being able to cut through the wheat and separating the wheat and the chaff. Whether you call problems wheat or chaff, it's more a notion that you can at least separate them and focus in on what you want to look at. In this case, I can fix what I can see, and in this environment, all of these hosts would definitely be at, we'd be uneasy in our protection status for all of these for the reasons shown. In the last 2 weeks, we've had no backups or abject failures for all of these hosts. Something needs attention. And, and what might need attention is simply that they've been decommissioned and they haven't been taken out of backup policies. There's lots of reasons that we will highlight issues for you. The key is that you can, with information becomes your ability to take action. So these dashboards, as I mentioned, they are absolutely configurable. And let me just shut down a couple of these tabs just to make more screen real estate for ourselves. And I'll take an excuse to show how easy it is to actually create a dashboard here. And along the way, I'll show a couple of out-of-the-box VM specific reports. 80-20 rule of problematic VM guests is actually another one of those great ideas that came from one of our customers that said, help me to see the heavy hitters in my environment, those that are using a lot of memory, a lot of CPU, that are doing a lot of disk reads, peak memory usage, etc. And initially they said they wanted those as individual reports, the most CPU used, memory usage, etc. We talked to them and said, well, how about if we give you, call it a pivot that shows that feature functionality for each guest. We'll show you if it's a offender, so to speak, in a heavy usage in multiple categories, we'll show you that. So for example, this VM called the Windows Nightly build is our second most CPU usage in this little lab. It's the 5th most disk usage, 2nd highest disk writes in terms of megabytes per second, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one report. And again, correlating information gathered through our VMware space. We can do all sorts of different information like a storage breakdown. This is going to actually rendered oddly there. So let's just go back and bring up another one, data store utilization. And let's render another one here called, these are just samples of output that we provide. There's some physical disk utilization. So I've got very quickly, I generated a number of reports and potentially would say, gee, that's interesting. I'd like to potentially put those into a dashboard. To do that, it would be as simple as going over and clicking on Add Dashboard, and then I could go down and so literally drag and drop and say, okay, I'll make that my top block. And then I'm going to go ahead and let's do this physical disk utilization. And I'm going to drag that and put it below. And maybe I'll take data store utilization and I'll put it, just to show the capability, we'll put it to the lower right. And that's it. That's a dashboard. At this stage, if I wanted to save that forever, I would simply go to my actions options here and save it. And then it would become retrievable and usable just like all the other dashboards that I've already accessed here in the past. So out of the box, we have hundreds of templates. They're focused around the modules that we offer. So particularly around Virtualization Manager, anything, because that's our goal today, is your audience. Anything that you see in these yellow folders are out of the box templates that are offered for you. And the terminology of a template is that typically, for example, if we looked at one of these data store performance summaries as an example, a template, when you run it, you're typically going to be given an opportunity to scope that. So you can scope it around, for example, a time frame. In this case, what window of time do we want to look at data store performance? And we can even then be more refined in saying, do we want to look at just specific VM servers? Do we want to limit ourselves to specific data stores? Do we want to do specific VM guests based on host naming, etc.? So this combination of starting with a template, scoping it, and then running it at the point that we'd saved that work, then it becomes what we called a report. So if you recall in the blue folder here called VMUG, I had saved these reports based on, you can see, a template, and they implied and were saved with scope, etc. So I think the last thing as I look at the clock here, and I'll make sure we allow time for questions and answers, is that as vast as the reports that we provide out of the box are, there's also an even bigger opportunity for you to go and look at additional information. So if I go out of full screen mode for a moment here and go to this URL that's visible to anyone, all those ideas that have come from customers that we may not have injected into the product yet, or may not feel that just to keep the size of the product in line, we may not add them officially to the product. You have this freely downloadable report library that's available to you by default. The last I counted, there's literally hundreds of additional, there's 15 times 20 additional templates in here. If you wish, you can focus in on a particular area. So for example, if we want to look at additional templates that are specific to VMware, I can look at them. And as soon as I do that, I'm a very visual learner, so I love the fact that I can just look at a title, click on the title, and see an example output of what I might expect in my own environment. If I like these, for example, that looks like an interesting predictive analytics, multi-metric in our language means that we're going to be computing a run-out date based on usually at least two different analytics. So in the case of period over period or linear regression, we're offering a run-out date based on both of those options. And you'll see in some cases some variation in the run-out date. In some cases, the calculation works out to be the same date, but statistics and any sort of analytics are as good or as bad as the data that's feeding them. And of course, it's all based on data variability, et cetera, all good. We don't try to hide anything. If I like this report, in 2 clicks, I can bring that into my template. The first would be to choose to download that RTD. I think I missed it when I clicked. And choose to save the file to my browser's area. And then within the Aptar environment, I can come in and I can ask to import, and I can bring that template in that we just downloaded. So I'll go to my downloads area. There's the VM data store multimetrics. Click OK. And the import's there, and it's going to now appear as another opportunity, another template for me to actually run and try that out. And you can note, again, scoping, we'll go for all data stores. I'm going to narrow down the time frame. The multi-metric forecast actually says I'm going to do forward projection based on a history of back in time to pull the statistics. And we'll just go ahead and choose a 60-day window and let this purr along. And there we go. So a rich tool, a capable tool in terms of being able to give you insight across many facets of your data center, the ability to correlate information, for example, to say we know about all the guests, we know about their performance, we can compare that, for example, against what's being backed up, and it's always leading towards an ability for you to do great analytics and information. And nothing that we do is particularly magical except for the fact that we bring it all together. So if someone were to say, for example, how do you grab this information? It's credentials through vSphere, and if VM tools are installed, then of course for each guest, we're going to be able to show you, no big surprise to VM users, we're going to be able to show what the operating system shows. We're going to be able to show the disks as the VMDKs, the files, etc. So I think that's good for now. I'm going to pass control back to Charles to sort of wrap us up and invite questions and answers.
That was excellent. Thank you, Ernie. For everyone who's on the phone, one of the key things in terms of the capability of the product, as Ernie said, there is something like 400 different reports that come out standard with the product. The bigger deal becomes what you can actually get from the report library, which is an open URL. In total, there's about 1,000 different reports that have been created by the Veritas Aptar engineering team, or more importantly, from other customers and other users using specifics. From a VMware in the cloud point of view, these are the sort of things you could be using this analytics technology for. If you want to be seeing just what you have in the cloud from a VMware granularity point of view, you can do that. You can be looking at not just single clouds, but you can be looking at your multiple cloud environments and pairing that to your multi-VMware deployments. So there's a lot of capabilities in terms of what you can actually do. If we look again as a sort of final slide, the critical business issues that we kind of called out at the right at the beginning, that's what this technology is all about. It's about solving that. It's giving you an idea of just what your total environment looks like, giving you that single visualization for it, and then addressing real issues of storage optimization or data protection optimization, your compliance rules and things that you need to look at. So we do thank everyone for their time. There was a question that came up that kept me honest. I think I might have said that there was trillions of iPhones to get to 160 plus zettabytes. I think I should have been saying billions. But with that, why don't we open to questions? And we're happy to answer anything that you might have. And again, thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you so much for that, Charles and Ernie. Very insightful stuff. For anybody that's interested in having a more in-depth and or personalized demonstration of the solution, definitely click on the link that's popping up right now on your screens. We'll be happy to follow up. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.